Amen. Well, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. All right, good. Well, thank you so much for your kind welcome. And, can you believe it? This is the first time I've ever been to the 11. Isn't that incredible? Incredible. I might come every week. I love it. It's great. I am married to Deborah, as you heard. And one thing you need to know about Deborah is she's absolutely amazing. She's great. And we got married here probably almost 20 years ago, just in that little spot down there. We got married. And we have, if you don't know much about me, we have two boys. They're 14 and 11. That's how old they are. That's not what their names are. But we are at a funny stage of life because many of you have sort of been at this stage, or perhaps you're sort of dreading this stage where actually, we no longer have kids at primary school. That's a scary time, isn't it? Tell me it's going to be all right. Is it going to be all right? It's going to be all right, isn't it? It's a whole new phase. Now, as Rachel said, this morning I'm finishing off your summer series that you've been doing, which is called Growth in the Desert. And we've been looking at various psalms in the Bible. And the psalms, if you're not familiar with them, they're a collection of 150 poems and prayers and songs. And, they give us an amazing insight into what it is to be human. They give us an amazing insight of what it is to how we respond to God in our humanity. And, if you've read the Psalms, that you'll know that the Psalms are not all raindrops on roses and whiskers on kittens. It's not all sort of joy and happiness. Actually, they are as much about the difficulties and the trials of life, the desert times, if you like, as they are about the joys and the victories of life. And actually what we know about the Psalms as well is actually they can be pretty raw and, in reflecting the sort of the ups and downs of what life is like. And they can make sort of slightly uncomfortable reading at times. But what we're particularly thinking about this morning is something that I think is relevant to every single one of us. What we're thinking about is something that we are all tempted to do. And I don't know, whether you're here this morning as someone who would call yourself a Jesus follower, whether you're here this morning, actually you're here for the first time and you're just sort of sussing things out, it might be that someone tricked you into being here this morning. It might be they said, I'm going to take you out to coffee this morning. And you arrive here and you've got a coffee in your hand, but you're thinking, who are all these crazy people? How did I end up here? If that's you this morning, actually I think whatever box, whatever category you fit into today, that actually the message today in this psalm is a message for all of us because it's something we all go through. This is something we're all tempted to do. And actually, here's the bad news about this. If we decide to give in to this temptation, then actually giving in to this temptation often causes misery and discouragement. It can make us feel unhappy. It can make us feel discontented. It can sometimes make us feel guilty. Actually, also, it sometimes might even lead us into financial debt. And actually, probably this is the most serious of all. Actually, it can wreck our relationships. And it can also affect our relationship with God. It doesn't sound great. Welcome to church. All happy, isn't it? It's great. This thing that we're all tempted to do is this. Comparison. Comparison. We are all tempted to compare ourselves to other people. We're tempted to compare our circumstances with somebody else's circumstances. And how do I measure up compared with you? In what ways am I better? In what ways do I fall short of what you do and what you have and what you're like and what you are achieving in life? And, thankfully, most of the time, when we compare ourselves, we do it in our head, don't we? It's a little bit less messy, isn't it? Doing it in our head when we compare. We're not sort of doing it out loud. But, imagine if you were saying them out loud. They would probably come out a bit like this. And I've written down a few ideas. And I don't know whether any of these sound familiar to you. Life seems so easy for them, whereas nothing seems to work out for me. I worked so much harder than you, and yet you got 2 A stars and an A, and I got an A and 2 Bs. I got the promotion and she didn't. I'm clearly much better at my job than she is. That's a really amazing car. That Aston Martin is absolutely incredible. I've got to put up with this old thing. You know, their kids are so out of control. You know, do they do any parenting? You know, I wouldn't let my kids behave like that. You know, we say things like, you know, she is an amazing worship leader. You know, I just feel so inadequate in comparison to that. You know, they seem to have this perfect marriage, and I can't even hold a relationship down for more than a few weeks. You know, she's really let herself go. There's no way I'd let myself get out of shape that much. You know, he's such a funny guy, that Nigel. You know, he's the life and soul of the party. I just feel shy and awkward. Thank you. And I reckon this is probably one that almost all of us have experienced. Those holiday photos on Facebook. It makes my, 4 days sitting in a puddle in Wales, just seem like a punishment. And actually, here's one that may or may not have gone through my head this week. I can't believe I got to speak at Woody's this week, in the presence of all these amazing leaders and these fantastic communicators. You get what I mean, don't you? These things are real, aren't they? They might not sound like, we might not actually sort of vocalize these things. We might not sort of put them in such a sort of blunt way, but actually comparisons are something that we are very tempted to do. They can be really subtle. And there's nothing wrong with competitive sports. We know, don't we, that Woodlands Rangers are the best team around, don't we? So, there's just some things you've just got to say. Competitive sport, great. A bit of casual banter amongst friends, as long as you're careful, I think that actually that's great. It's great to aim to be successful in business and get a competitive advantage and be successful in that. Also, I'm not talking about, we want to set a good example to other people, don't we? We want to inspire people with what we do in our lives. We want to be inspired by other people. Actually, that's not really what I mean when I'm talking about comparison this morning, because comparison is a heart issue. Comparison is a heart issue. It's about what's going on inside here. Now, we've not even opened the Bible yet, but I'm just going to give you the point and the application right now. So it might be you've switched off already. Just switch back in, just listen to this bit. The point is this: comparison, don't do it. Comparison, don't do it. Well, why is that? Well, a guy called Andy Stanley, he said this. And you always listen to everybody put their arms out like that, because they clearly know what they're talking about. Comparison is a game with no winners. Comparison is a game with no winners. You see, when you compare yourself with someone else and you just don't seem to measure up, then so often we can end up discontented. We can end up envious. We can end up jealous and insecure. And actually all that stuff sort of starts to take root in our lives. It might start small, but it has this tendency to grow and to become something actually where it just takes away our joy, and it starts affecting the way in which we relate to other people and the way in which we talk to other people. And not only that, but this whole sort of keeping up with the Joneses thing. When it comes to our possessions and our lifestyles, we think, I'd like that because they've got that, and actually that often leads to us spending more money than we have and leads us into debt. It's not just the inward sort of stuff that's going on, but actually the outward stuff as well. And then on the other side of the coin, with comparison, when you compare yourself favorably with someone else, then actually that might not seem like a really big deal, but so often it leads to pride. It leads to a sense of arrogance. It's quite often it leads to gossip and a looking down and a talking down to other people, even if it might not seem like that at first. That actually it sort of turns into that the more we let it fester. And so comparison gets you either way. Comparison gets you either way, because the reality is, and we know this is true, that no matter what you're comparing, there's always going to be someone who's better than you, and there's always going to be someone who is not as good as you. There's always going to be someone who is fitter and slimmer, and there's always going to be someone who's not. And so comparison gets you either way. And then here's where it gets really ugly. And this is all bad news. The good news is coming. Don't worry, just stick with it. The bad news, the really ugly times are like this. Have you ever felt just a little hint of satisfaction or happiness when something's gone wrong for someone else? You know, he seems to be so perfect, and then he flunks this exam. You know, she seems to be so amazing at her job, but then her boss picks up on a mistake. And actually, there's just a little something in you that just smiles. It just makes you feel that little bit better about yourself. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. But let me be honest with you. I have had times in my life where I've recognized that emotion. And that's where it gets really ugly, isn't it? When we compare and we let ourselves get to that stage. But as we open our Bibles, actually what we find is that comparison has been an issue with humankind all the way through history. You know, just a few pages in, we see Cain and Abel. We see Cain comparing his offering to Abel's. We see Joseph and his brothers and what that leads to. We see it with King Saul's jealousy of David, who was to become King David. You know, we see it in the New Testament, Jesus' disciples arguing with one another about who was the best, who was the greatest. And in all those cases, it really didn't end that well. And so we see it also in the psalm that we're dipping into today. So if you've got a Bible, whether it's digital or analog, or actually if you just want to look on the screen, we're going to read Psalm 73. We're going to read parts of it today and just see some of this comparison in action. And we're going to read, first of all, verses 1 to 14, and starts like this. Surely God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet had almost slipped. I had nearly lost my foothold. And this is where the comparison starts. For I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. They have no struggles. Their bodies are healthy and strong. They are free from common burdens and not plagued by human ills. Therefore, pride is their necklace. They clothe themselves with violence. From their callous hearts comes iniquity. Their evil imaginations have no limits. They scoff and speak with malice. With arrogance they threaten oppression. Their mouths lay claim to heaven, and their tongues take possession of the earth. Therefore, their people turn to them and drink up waters in abundance. They say, how would God know? Does the Most High know anything? This is what the wicked are like, always free of care. They go on amassing wealth. And then the psalmist compares with his own circumstances. Surely in vain I have kept my heart pure and have washed my hands of innocence. All day long I've been afflicted, and every morning brings new punishments. And in particular here, the psalmist is comparing himself with those that are not seeking to please God. They don't have God in their lives. And why are their lives so easy? Look at all the money that I'd have if I wasn't seeking to honor God with my life. Look at their health. They seem to be free from hassle and cares and worries. I'm trying my best to lead a good life, and yet it feels like everything is a mess. And I don't know, we might be tempted to compare ourselves with people around us in those sorts of ways, mightn't we? Like the psalmist did. Who sort of recognises those things? You do that? I think the great thing is, though, as we read on in this psalm, we learn something of how we can deal with this whole comparison thing. From verse 15, the psalmist realises that actually he needs to look up instead of looking around him. So we can read from verse 15. It says this. If I had spoken out like that, I would have betrayed your children. When I tried to understand all this, it troubled me deeply till I entered the sanctuary of God. Then I understood their final destiny. You see, there's a psalmist, instead of vocalizing his complaint to everyone around, instead of falling into that temptation, what he does is he brings it to God. Until I come into the sanctuary, I bring it to God. And I think one of the keys to getting back on track when we're tied up in comparison, when comparison seeks to sort of paralyze us and dominate our minds, actually one of the keys is to express our insecurities and our envies and our complaints to God, to go to him with them. He is big enough to take it. It's not a shock to him. I think sometimes we can have a view of God that is a little bit like this, that, he's sort of striding around in heaven and he's getting a bit stressed. Because he looks down and he thinks, oh my goodness me, what on earth are they doing? And it's like hands on his head, and he turns to the angels and says, can you believe what he just said to me? Sometimes I wonder whether we can think that God is a bit like that. But actually, I don't think that's what God is like at all. He receives and he accepts our craziness, our crazy talk, and we can go to him with it. There's no shock, there's no indignation, there's no surprise. As we express our insecurities to him. And, as is so often the case in most of these Psalms in the Bible, these complaints, this anguish, it turns around and actually things start to get into their proper perspective as we express those things to God. We see it here in verse 23. The psalmist goes on to say, "Yet I am always with you. You hold me by my right hand." He remembers where his security is. I'm secure in you. You've got my back. You guide me with your counsel, and afterwards you will take me into glory. I'm not only secure in the present, but actually I've got a secure future too. And my destiny is with my Father in heaven. It says, "Whom have I in heaven but you? And earth has nothing I desire besides you." The psalmist just has this perspective. He recognizes that actually, my goodness me, you're all I need. Really what I need is your love and your forgiveness. Really all this other stuff, all this other stuff is just minor detail in life. Actually, all I need is you. He goes on to say, verse 26, "My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever." We might be tempted to look to other stuff for our security and our significance, our gifts and our skills and our circumstances, and we might sort of think, I want to be better at this and do that. But actually, ultimately, all that stuff just passes away, and it's God that we really need. He is our portion forever when we end up being tempted to compare. Later on in the Bible, a guy called Paul. Paul wrote, loads of the New Testament. And, he picks up on a very similar theme in Philippians. And we're just going to read a couple of verses there. In fact, we're going to read them together. Philippians chapter 4. Let's read them all together. Here we go. "I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength." I have learned the secret of being content. I heard a story of an old tribal chief in the Congo. And, he asked his chief witch doctor to come and help him. Because even though, this chief had everything, he still had this feeling of, I'm not happy and I'm not fulfilled and I'm not content. And the witch doctor, he told the chief that actually what he needs to do, he'd find lasting satisfaction if he found the shirt of a contented man and took hold of it. And so this chief, he sent off his subjects out into the wilderness. And after this really, really long search, they tracked down this man who just seemed to be so happy and content. And they went back to the chief and they reported back. And the chief said, so where's his shirt? "Well, he didn't have one," they replied. What's the secret of being content? The meaning of content in this passage that Paul is talking about is self-sufficient. It's having enough. It's having what you need. It's not what we possess that makes us content. And Paul says here, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. If I've got Jesus, then that's enough. I'm sorted. You know, it's not I can do all things if only God would give me a spouse. It's not I can do all things if I've got a MacBook Pro. Okay, maybe. You know, it's I can do all things through him. He's enough through Jesus. He is enough. Paul says that contentment, having all he needs, it's found through Jesus. It's found through him. Jesus promises to satisfy our deepest longings in our hearts. He promises that he is enough for all we need in life. Maybe you're here this morning, you don't know Jesus. You don't even know what I'm talking about what it is to have Jesus. We'd love to tell you a bit more about that, what it means to have Jesus in our lives. But, it's Jesus who affirms who we really are. It's Jesus who gives us our identity and our worth. It's Jesus who brings a deep satisfaction and contentment and an acceptance of the way in which we're wired and the way in which we're made. Elsewhere in the Psalms, King David wrote this, Psalm 139. Let's read this out loud together as well. Psalm 139, verse 14. 1, 2, 3, go. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. One of the things that Jesus does is help us to know that truth full well. We might wish that we were more beautiful and intelligent and wealthy and popular, and we might wish that we're a bit more gifted and more like they are. But God, in his infinite wisdom, has made us just the way we are, in the words of Bridget Jones-ish. The point is not what we have. The point is what we're choosing to do with who we are, the way in which God has wired us, what he's put into our hands. And in just a minute, we're going to worship and respond to God. And actually, we're just going to have an opportunity to say to God, yeah, it's you that is the only one I need. But, as I come into land, just in a few minutes, I don't know whether you're anything like me. Every now and then you sit in a talk and you try to stay awake. And you have all these sort of strategies for doing it. You start pinching yourself, or you have something to suck, or you have a drink to drink, something like that. But actually you also, sometimes you get to a point in a talk where you think to yourself, okay, this is great, but tell me what to do. What do I actually have to do? I'd like to think at Highgrove we have this little phrase where we want our talks to have sort of handles on them. Like you carry out a suitcase. We actually, what can I carry out? What can I do? And actually the reality is this, of course, that there are very few quick fixes in life. There's very few sort of, just do this and that will happen. Actually, the Christian life involves patience and plugging away and faithfulness and persistence. But I don't know, when it comes to comparison and contentment, there's one thing on my mind this morning that you can do that I think is a game changer, that will make a real difference to you for the rest of today, that will make a real difference to your Monday, even though it's a bank holiday, and it's a great one, but for the rest of this week. And that is this: gratitude. Gratitude. I usually commute the 9 miles or so back to work when I go to work, not very much. And I've got into this habit when I cycle to work, is that, as soon as I ride away from the house in the morning, I just start thanking God for stuff. Just something I've got into the habit of doing. So clearly I start with the important stuff first. So Lord, thank you so much for my bike. I love it. It's great. I love my bike. Lord, thank you so much that my limbs are working this morning, that I've got the physical health to be able to cycle my bike into work. Thank you so much for this house and for all you've provided for me. Thank you so much for my loving family, even though they're still in bed because it's the holidays. Thank you so much for them. Thank you for this amazing community of Sea Mills that I live in. Thank you that I've got a job to go to today. Thank you for my job and the way in which you provided that. Thank you for all the people that I'm going to see today at work. Thank you for what you're doing in their lives. And actually what I have found in that simple step, and so many of us have known it and experienced it, what I've found is that actually when we spend time thanking God, it helps us to be more content. It helps us to be less tempted to compare ourselves with other people. It puts everything in the right perspective. It really is a winner, Thanksgiving. Gratitude is a winner. It's something we can do. It's something we can do today. And as a bonus, actually, when I go to work and I thank God, it also helps me not to worry about what's happening in the day ahead. It helps me, give me perspective on what things are all about. So today, when you go home, thank God for what you've got. Thank God for what you're like, the way he's wired you. Thank God for what you're good at. Thank God for, there's just the simple little silly things in life, even if you haven't got a bike. Thank God. Thank God for every single person that he's put in your life, no matter how you're tempted to think about them. It's amazing what gratitude does in changing our perspective. If you feel a bit hard done by compared to someone else, just remember how incredibly rich and blessed you are. If you're feeling really great about yourself and you feel a bit tempted to compare yourself favorably with someone else, thank God for what is happening, because it helps keep you humble. It helps you to remember that it's not me, but it's God that has done this. It's God who's been great. Because as we've seen, and as the psalmist has demonstrated, comparison is a game with no winners. When we're tempted to compare, let's bring it to God. When we're feeling insecure, let's offload it to God with confidence. He's going to take it, he's going to receive it, and it's going to help us. When we're successful, let's thank God for his goodness. When we feel inadequate, let's remember that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. There are no wins in comparison. There are no winners when it comes to the comparison game. And that's all I just want to say this morning. And actually, one of the things that's funny about talking is that actually talking is actually a reasonably easy thing to do. Actually putting stuff into practice in your life, actually I find a bit harder. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes, even for me this week, I've been really challenged by some of the things I've been thinking about. And so actually that is where we need prayer, isn't it? That's where we need to ask God for his help. And so I don't know whether this morning there's something there that grabbed you. Maybe one of the hypothetical situations I mentioned, whether actually you know in your life that even though you might not vocalize it in such a blunt way, that actually there is somebody or something at the moment that is particularly tempting you to compare yourself, either favorably or unfavorably with someone else. And actually what God wants to do today is take a chance to cut that off at the root, for that not to grow in your life, for that not to have that impact and that effect on your relationships with other people. So very simply, I'm going to pray for you. And actually, can you stand? Let's stand up together. There's something I think often about standing up that just sort of is a bit of a statement of a step towards God. A sort of a statement of intent that I just want to come towards you and I want to reach out for you. Lord, thank you so much for your goodness. Lord, I want to thank you so much that you love us. I want to thank you. It's true for every single one of us that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. Help us to know that full well. And I do want to pray here today for anybody who, even just me mentioning some things this morning, have just stirred up some feelings or some reactions that maybe they haven't even recognized before. And I want to pray that they might know your help, even this week. I pray you'd help them to be able to practice gratitude, to practice being thankful, and that might just turn their whole perspective on these situations around. And Lord, we know it's easy to have intentions now, but we need your Spirit to work in our lives to help us to put this into practice when the rubber really hits the road. So help us, we pray. Holy Spirit, come fill us. Come fill me. Fill us up, Lord. All that we need. Thank you that you're enough for us. Amen.